Oh, it worked. Huh, amazing. Um, and if it worked for you as well, you should now see behind me two pictures. Perhaps you'd give me a wave if you see the two pictures. You may not see them very clearly. Brilliant, brilliant. And now I have a bit of a challenge. I should really try to sit still while these images are on the screen, because if I move about, the camera gets confused and goes in and out of focus. Bear with. The picture you ought to see, I think you've got it the wrong way around, because it's the system inverts things. System you ought to see over my right shoulder. No, it's over my left shoulder in my picture. It may well be familiar to many. Anybody recognize the image of the cross in the sky? Yes, one or two. It's a very famous image. And if we were all together in church, I'd be testing you to see if you knew what it is and where it hangs even. But even on Zoom, I can see some of you know it and say its name. It's the Christ of St. John of the Cross, the striking and very powerful image of the crucifixion by Salvador Dali. It's of great significance to me personally because a large copy of that picture hung over my bed in college 6 decades ago. Just recently, I used the downtime of lockdown to get round to putting a copy up above my bed here. It's been sitting waiting for me to do that for about a month. So I thank God for the lockdown in that case. Does anyone recognize the other image, the one behind the altar? It's a little more obscure. Give a wave if you recognize it. I'm not expecting you to particularly. Some of you may know it, have not seen it in the real world. This is the wonderful to me and very large mosaic by John Piper. It's made for and placed in a rather special church, built at the end of the 50s as the mother church, right in the heart of the new town centre at Harlow in Essex. Like the Dali, if you could see it clearly, it's a compelling image. But unlike the Dali, it isn't immediately obvious what we're looking at. There are 3 figures, which is a pretty good clue, especially today. It is in fact 2 people walking along a road who meet a third traveller who engages them in conversation. And if you still haven't worked it out, then you're a very, very naughty person indeed, because you weren't paying much attention to the second Bible reading. Piper called it the risen Christ at Emmaus. It's among the first of many works he made for churches and cathedrals. You may have seen his glass in Coventry or in the Paddy's Wigwam in Liverpool. I wanted to show you these 2 images for 2 main reasons. First, because it seems to me that through the last 50 years and increasingly today, our relationship with each other and with the world God has given us to live in and to care for, I mean our relationship as a people generally, is more and more perceived through and perhaps even dominated by visual images. And second, because just like words, images can have 2 effects. They can help us to understand the truth more fully, or they can help to deceive us, to lead us away from the truth. And there's plenty of that going on at present. But only when the image is connected to either a truth or a deception, connected to either truth or deception by words, does the image convey anything. For almost all of our history, our understanding of the world, of each other, and of God was predominantly through words. The bedrock of our faith is the Bible and what it tells us about God and his Son. The bedrock for me in worship and in prayer is the Book of Common Prayer, together with hymns ancient and modern, part of my life since childhood. And yes, as those who know me well will know that I'm one of those fuddy-duddies who still says and sings, accidentally in most cases, the wrong words in common worship or in some new edition of the hymnal, where some committee with no sense of poetry in its soul has decided that moons shall now rise and set when they don't, because people might not know that in the real world they still do actually wax and wane. But I digress. And yes, Horace, I hear some of you thinking, if not saying, that's not at all unusual, you do digress a lot. My point is that for the whole, almost the whole of human existence, our main connection with each other has been through words, through language. Yes, we have used images, from the earliest cave paintings through to the work of Tracy Emin. You well know Tracy Emin. She's got a specially commissioned example of her work hanging, believe it or not, in Liverpool Cathedral. Now, Marvin won't have heard of that because it's not in Yorkshire. And it's hanging in Liverpool Cathedral very prominently. I'd hoped to see it again a couple of weeks ago, but the lockdown cancelled the service I was due to attend. But back to images. We've always had and used images, but for most of history, we've seen them as an added extra, a very important added extra, even an added dimension, but with words still the mainstay of our communication and our relationships. It seems to me that this has changed and continues to change, that the image has become more dominant, the word, if anything, serving the image rather than the image complementing and perhaps enhancing or reinforcing what we hear and read and learn and discuss and dispute through words. Fewer and fewer people read what we used to call the broadsheet newspapers, the ones that are mainly words. If they do take a newspaper at all, it's the one with a picture dominating the front page and with much more space inside for pictures than for words. Fewer and fewer people listen to the spoken word on radio. They listen to music, or more likely they use the music just as a background. And even with the visual image, for most people, this is either pure entertainment or again, just background. It first struck me most forcibly a few years back when we stayed in Barcelona and visited Gaudi's extraordinary Basilica of the Sagrada Familia. There were hundreds and hundreds of tourists gathered outside, but they weren't looking at the building. They were taking selfies, images of themselves with the back building behind them. They weren't looking at it. Their backs were to it. Once one's noticed this, of course, you see it everywhere. Thank God for art galleries that don't allow photography, unlike the one in St. Petersburg, where other tourists became quite visibly agitated and confused even when I stood for a time simply looking at a painting that I'd wanted to see. I was getting in their way. I should have done the right thing, the obvious thing, what they were there to do. Take a quick selfie before moving swiftly on. What on earth do they do with all these selfies? And that, it seems to me, is another characteristic of our age, a shorter and shorter attention span, coupled with a shorter and shorter fuse as people take sides almost instantly in any dispute, take sides almost instantly and then entrench themselves so that no real discussion takes place. There's no scope for a meeting of the minds. There's no listening to reasoned argument. All too quickly, reasoned argument goes out of the window, replaced by name calling. I think it's called Twitter. Yes. The selfie, the tweet, the frenetic need to fill time with distractions, to glance and to move on rather than to stand and stare, to think, to contemplate. I love these two images. Even though I like to look at Dali's crucifixion, I don't actually need to. That's been there in my mind's eye for nearly 60 years. It won't go out. Piper's Emmaus is in contrast new to me. I only came across it this year. And it's so different from the Dali. Mysterious rather than self-explanatory. Powerful in its grace and gentleness, where Dali is strong, dramatic. Where the Dali is huge and clear, is Christ dominating the world even in his agony. The Piper is humble in its depiction of three anonymous figures who could be anyone or no one until we know the title of the image. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but these images would be meaningless unless we already knew those thousands of words. And I pray that as we live through and as we emerge from the perils and pressures and immense challenges of this pandemic, we can continue to find new ways to use both words and images and the multiplying leverage of technology as part of fulfilling our mission of making Christ known in our communities. Amen.